So look, yes, originally there was supposed to be a subscribe joke here, but this image of Killua covered in YouTube subscribe buttons took me so long to make that I'm just gonna take a step back this time around and let the image speak for itself. Hello and welcome to the New World Review, your source for everything anime and manga, and more specifically, welcome to the bittersweet end of the Hunter x Hunter arc review. So rather sadly, last time around we covered the most recent arc in the series, bringing us up to date with modern events, but to really cap off this exploration with everything fresh in our minds, I think it's time for a good old-fashioned Hunter x Hunter arc ranking. Now I want to emphasize right in the beginning here that the following is in no way an objective exercise, and I will be ranking all 9 of these arcs strictly according to my own personal preferences. One thing I would also like to add for anime-only watchers is that while I will be ranking the 2 arcs of the manga only, I will endeavor to do my best not to spoil them whilst discussing them, but really I cannot encourage you enough to make the leap and join this wonderful community by reading the manga. But with that out of the way, let's begin! Welcome to the New World Review's official Hunter x Hunter arc ranking. Number 9. The Dark Continent Expedition. I feel like this one isn't such a huge surprise if you listen to my thoughts on it in the arc review series, but this is a super weird piece of story, which is kind of a shame because if you look at it on an event by event basis, there is so much interesting content to digest here because every scene is well constructed and contributes a hell of a lot to the expansion of our characters and even more so of the world at large. The issue is obviously that this arc isn't really an arc. It's 9 chapters of bridging material between 2 arcs with no unique intent of its own. Everything the Dark Continent Expedition arc accomplishes is in service of consolidating the arc before it and setting up the arc after it, which it does so very, very well. But it is my belief that it should just be incorporated into the Succession War, and I have no idea why the decision was made to separate these 9 chapters in this manner. And of course, the arc also doesn't have a clear ending. The final page of the final chapter holds no real tone of finality about it, and instead it acts as more of a middling intrigue chapter, slowly building towards something bigger, which in effect it is. And that is probably the sole reason why I'm placing it in the opening spot. These 9 chapters are profoundly enjoyable, there's nothing wrong with them at all. In fact, they hold some of my favorites in the series, but when considering them as an arc, well, they certainly fail in that specific purpose. Number 8. The 13th Hunter Chairman Election. So here is an arc that I was ever so grateful for when going through the series for the first time, because it finally gave us some much needed respite from the Chimera Ant plague and reintroduced us back into the world and characters of Hunter x Hunter proper. It was a feeling of bizarre magic euphoria because it was like we were home again. However, the cold reality of Gon's condition was present throughout the entirety of the piece. However, that did lead to Best Boy Killua stepping in and finally taking on the role of main protagonist for a Hunter x Hunter arc, a role which he performed to perfection, defying his family and using everything at his disposal not only to save Gon, but also to protect his sister Alaka. And in general, it was just a great climax to Killua's character arc, as well as heavily featuring the much underrated Leorio, and of course introducing us to the ever-intriguing Zodiacs. So why is it this far down on the rankings for me? It certainly has nothing to do with any flaws because there really aren't too many here, but part of it may be because it was a shorter arc. A short and sweet experience, but then again, so are most arcs in the series. But the more easily identifiable reasoning is simply that I like every other arc more than this one. Number 7. The Zeltiq Family. Moving now to the shortest arc in the series and the only one considered unofficial. This arc in isolation is probably the most perfect piece of storytelling in Hunter x Hunter. It is an example of strict, lean efficiency, getting in and getting out in 5 chapters, but also being able to portray an incredible journey within that ridiculously short amount of time. The ideas are clear, the new characters are exceptionally compelling, and the established cast each step up and evolve in their own way, laying down the path for the future of the series. I really cannot overstate how much of an achievement these 5 chapters are, but once again, therein lies the reasoning for placing it here. Other arcs in this series may not be as narratively solid as the Zeltiq Family, but they are given the time to seek higher heights than this arc allows, which isn't a criticism of the arc at all, it's just that there is only so much you can do with 5 chapters, and while the Zeltiq Family arc certainly did maximize that output, other arcs just had greater opportunities afforded to them through the factor of time. Number 6. Greed Island. So here is the first example of an arc that had much higher heights to achieve, as it is responsible for one of the most memorable aspects of Hunter x Hunter, being the infamous dodgeball match against Razor. And to be perfectly honest, that by itself is enough for me to be placing this arc as high as it is, and I think Greed Island should be quite thankful for that encounter actually, because as opposed to the Zeltiq Family arc, this was certainly not one of the greater moments of storytelling within the series. Greed Island certainly does have a compelling sort of isekai aspect about it, as applied to Hunter x Hunter, but it's always a very tricky thing to isolate your characters in a space space like this, which ignores the greater world around it. And while Greed Island did try to make up for that by bringing in figures like Hisoka and the Phantom Troop, which yeah, was fun, ultimately Greed Island read as kind of like an isolated training arc with a spot of dodgeball. Plus it features the narratively weakest long-term antagonist in the series, being Genthru, and I mean this man just is not equipped to helm a long arc and is consistently overshadowed by the presence of Razor. However, with Razor, Bisky, and a brief alliance with Hisoka, this arc is still incredibly enjoyable and has some pretty damn fine achievements. Not quite enough to break the top 5 though. Number 5. The Hunter Exam. Here we have the arc that started it all, and one that tends to be heavily underrated by the fanbase at large, including myself most of the time. And that's because the Hunter Exam presents the series in its most stereotypically shonen form. There isn't a whole lot of depth to it, and most of the story follows very standard beats. Most of it. However, I cannot deny the strength of this arc, because after all it was my first experience of Hunter x Hunter, and it was compelling enough to keep me watching it by introducing me to a great set of protagonists, a couple of terrifying antagonists, and the intriguing concept of hunters and hunting at large. Plus, the whole idea of the Hunter Exam is just something that appeals to me by default. As I've said maybe about 1 billion times before, deadly games are very much my jam, so a lot of the more tried elements within this arc were easily forgiven. So yeah, I do think that the Hunter Exam gets quite a bad rap, but on its own it is a very solid arc, and one that I do tend to appreciate much more in retrospect. Number 4. The Succession War. Getting serious now, here we have the latest and only incomplete arc in the series at the time of this recording. And part of me did think that I should have given it a technical last place for that logic alone, but at the same time I cannot deny the fantastic experience that I have had with this arc to date. The Succession War is another story that comes to completely redefine Hunter x Hunter, as well as Togashi as an author, exploring a completely new narrative structure and general tone of the world at large. This arc is dark, complex, and promises to have severe ramifications on Hunter x Hunter as we know it through the largest assortment of primary and secondary cast members that we've ever had the privilege of exploring. And honestly, once this arc is completed, I could see it easily obliterating some of the remaining arcs above it on this ranking here today. In fact, if it manages to maintain its current standard of quality, I really don't see why it couldn't go all the way and reach number 1. And I should say that the quality I'm referring to is that of the writing and storytelling rather than the art itself so much, because the Succession War certainly does have its artistic setbacks, many of which are rectified in the volume releases, but overall, at the moment, I really don't care. Togashi has created something that has already gone beyond my expectations and has me craving more like never before. Number 3. Heaven's Arena. In third place, we have the arc that I credit for truly igniting my love for Hunter x Hunter. Heaven's Arena is where Togashi really began to escalate and nut out this world, primarily through introducing us to the concept of Nen, which, while it was a lot to take on board in that relatively short period that was this arc, it did lay the groundwork for all of the greatness to come. This was also the first arc in the series that focused on breaking up our merry band of 4 protagonists, choosing to focus specifically on Gon and Killua, and the true beginning of the greatest friendship ever portrayed in media. Plus, as far as pure action goes, this arc was on point like no other, with the immediate highlight of course being Gon versus Hisoka, which I believe to be one of the crowning achievements of the 2011 anime adaptation, which made phenomenal use of sound and atmosphere to really give this event some punch. But the best thing about Heaven's Arena is that while it takes its time to explore the ideas it represents, this arc does not overstay its welcome. It takes exactly as much time as it needs, whereas a more typical story might find itself bogged down in its combat tournament-y setting. Hunter x Hunter does not fall into that trap, which is one of the many grand achievements of Heaven's Arena. Number 2. The Chimera Ants. So interestingly enough, unlike Heaven's Arena, I firmly believe that this is an arc that takes a lot more time than it needed to complete. The Chimera Ant arc is by far the longest arc in the series, sitting at a terrifying 133 manga chapters, which played out over the course of 8 years of real-life publishing time. So why is it in the number 2 spot? Well, that's because this arc undoubtedly is home to some of the greatest triumphs of the series, including the entire stretch of the Palace Invasion, which is one of the most compelling tales that I have ever had the privilege of seeing play out. And it's hard to succinctly summarize all of the highlights that the Chimera Ant arc gives us, but Netero vs Meruem is a huge standout, as well as Gon vs Neferpito. But what really comes to define this arc are simply the superb cast of characters, each of whom are more than worthy of individual praise. So many so that we don't have the time to go into them all today, and in fact we didn't even have time to go into them when I was focusing a review solely on this arc. But Knuckle, Shoot, Moral, Nov, Ikalgo, the entire Royal Guard, Meruem himself, and even Komugi, all of whom are phenomenal and capable couple of commanding portions of story focusing simply on them, as if they were the protagonists of the piece. So I'm afraid there is but one reason why the Chimera Ant arc does not top my ranking here today, and it's because the fatigue in this arc is very, very real. There were points where I just wanted to stop watching it, and in fact I did take an extended break probably about halfway through, and I do think there's a lot of unnecessary stuff, such as far too many battles with inconsequential ants, but I simply cannot deny what Togashi was able to pull off in the grand scheme of things. But with that in mind, we still need to examine number 1. York New City. This is probably as close to perfection as we can get with a long form arc in Hunter x Hunter. It has the feeling of tight, concise, and effective narrative that something like the Zeltiq Family arc represents, as well as the depth of ideas available to a long form arc like Greed Island or the Chimera Ants. And as a result, York New City is just such a balanced piece of storytelling because it has the time to present us with something of real substance, but it never feels drawn out and fatiguing. Plus, as the one arc in the series that specifically focuses on the Phantom Troop, this was always going to be destined for greatness, as they are probably the finest group of antagonists within the series as a whole. And we also can't forget the glory that is seeing Kurapika take the reins of the series for the first time. And yes, this arc does have its minor flaws, like taking a whole chapter to explain the process of a niche area of auctions for very minimal payoff, but they are few and far between. Overall, this is probably the most well-constructed, completed arc, with the most captivating characters and an enthralling story. It doesn't quite have the supreme heights of the Chimera Ant arc, but it also doesn't have its crippling lows either, which is why I firmly believe that York New City should rank as the number 1 best arc in all of Hunter x Hunter. But what do you guys think? Please do leave your thoughts in the comments below, or even join my Discord server. And if you're keen for some more Hunter x Hunter content, then please do go and check out some of my other videos, or even subscribe to the channel for regular Hunter x Hunter glory delivered straight into your YouTube feed. But for now, this has been the New World Review, and I'll see you next time.